India's jobs issue is a long-standing one which was worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic, where more and more people lost jobs, unemployment rates moved to nearly all-time highs. Now, the question is, are we improving? The data that is coming out honestly is giving mixed signals. Now, there's CMIE data which talks about the labor participation and the number of people who are participating in jobs dropping to about 40% from 46% over the last few years. In fact, this data claims that about half of India's 900 million strong employment force is no longer even looking for jobs. On the other hand, if you look at data coming in from private agencies like Monster, it seems like things have improved almost to pre-pandemic levels. So what is the true picture? Are we better off as far as jobs are concerned? Are we seeing a K-shaped recovery in jobs as we are in many parts of the economy, which is that some kinds of jobs are seeing a greater growth and higher salaries, while others have seen a depression? To get a better sense of the job situation in India, I'm speaking today with Sekhar Garisa, CEO of Monster.com. I'm also speaking with Jang Bahadur Singh, Head IT Sector at AON India. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for joining us on the India Development Debate. Sekhar, let me get your take first. Monster has put out some data recently. Is it showing a recovery, a significant recovery if I were to compare with 2019?
Absolutely. And that's what the data says. And I've been saying this to you consistently over the past few quarters, Tamanna. We only see the job creation data going up positively over the last few quarters post the dip in the pandemic. In fact, this month we reported that compared to the pre-pandemic level, which is March 2020, what the data tells us that we're at about 6.5% higher than where we were then. So in this category of jobs that we are talking about, we definitely see a complete recovery to levels which are far higher than what it was pre-pandemic. However, I do get the dichotomy that you spoke about, the CMIE report. I think it's an India of two halves, and there are people who are on the other side of the spectrum of job growth. I'm sure there are challenges there in terms of formalization, in terms of people getting displaced. But on the white collar side of things, which is the data that we track, we consistently see that across the board of 27 sectors that we track, 13 cities that we track, the data has been very, very encouraging.
You know, when we're talking about formalization of jobs, let me just take our viewers through some data which has come out from the EPFO, that's the Employment Provident Fund Organization of India. And this is really the gold standard considered to track formal jobs, because formal jobs are the ones which have to necessarily have their employees as part of the EPFO, or part of your salary goes into this pension fund. And this shows that 5.18 crore subscribers have been added between September 2012 to February 2022. So that's nearly 9.5 years. In February, 9.34 lakh new employees joined the scheme. New joinees are down by almost 2 lakh when compared to January, which had 11.14 lakh new subscribers. Just to follow up to Sekhar before I come to Mr. Singh. So when you say in this category, jobs are back to March 2020 levels, what category of jobs are these, and how much are these in absolute terms? How many number of jobs are these in absolute terms?
So we're talking about white collar space here, which are the skilled category of employers. And, the data that you would be looking at would be a mix of skilled, semi-skilled and unskilled, because a lot of those jobs also get formalized and therefore they get registered in EPFOs as well. So in the category of jobs that we track as part of Monster Employment Index, which is for skilled category of candidates, there we see absolute growth in terms of numbers to pre-pandemic levels across the cities, across the industries, save for a few, engineering, construction. There we saw a dip in the job data. Hospitality is almost back to pre-pandemic levels, but across the board, whether it's fintech, whether it's IT in general, whether it's edutech, everywhere we've seen jobs bounce back. To your second question, in terms of the absolute number of jobs that we are looking at, on our platform, we have about 600,000 jobs at this point in time. And if I aggregate the data across all online space, we're talking about, close to more than 1.5 million jobs in that gets explicitly advertised for candidates. That's the scale that we're talking about, which is covered by this report.
Okay. Mr. Singh, I want to get your sense of what data that Aon is putting together is showing. Is it mirroring these trends where we're almost back to pre-pandemic levels when you come to the creamy jobs?
So I think absolutely the data that we have, what we've been hearing from the industry, also echoes the point about India almost being a nation of two halves when it comes to the corporate sector. You have your more traditional sectors where a lot of the growth is dependent on demand from the domestic segment, which has been sluggish and it is still on the road to recovery. Whereas on the other hand, you have the ITS, technology, BPO outsourcing, and the entire e-commerce segment, which has been on a fast track path to growth. And when we look at majority of the job creation that is happening, it's in this segment, whether it be with the advent of or the explosion of the entire startup community, whether it be about newer captives coming into India and setting up shop. We all heard about how the global supply chains have broken down. A lot of organizations today are facing margin pressures, which has forced them to look at India as an alternative and which is leading to job creation across the board. So I think when we're looking at what's happening, it's important to take a nuance view wherein we break it down by sectors and also by skills. Now you spoke about the fact how a lot of individuals are today struggling to find the jobs to suit their skill set. And what our data shows is that a lot of these are people who are semi-skilled or people who are not at the cutting edge when it comes to skills to do with digital. And which is where I think they are struggling to find the right set of jobs. And a lot of these are people these are people who also are who have dependencies internally, domestically, and then are struggling to meet requirements of strenuous jobs that they might be applying to. And I think that's where the entire picture is coming up.
I want to speak about jobs in the IT space because those are the ones which hit the headlines, and after the slew of quarterly numbers, the big theme coming out once again are really high attrition levels. Can you explain to us why, Mr. Singh, there are attrition levels in such top-class companies which have the most coveted jobs, your Infosys, Wipro, TCS? Where are these people going? Is there a shift towards more startups or towards new age companies? What's happening in that space?
No, I think very interesting. If you look back at what has happened in 2021, and we've been tracking this data for almost 2 decades now. And what we've seen is that the attrition that we saw in 2021 was the highest in 2 decades. And I think there are multiple reasons for this. Number one was that 2020, the COVID year, was also the time where we had very low attrition, very low job opportunities. Secondly, with everything going online, the entire consumer behavior shifted overnight, and which is where organizations had to radically change the way they were reaching out to customers and adopting digital skills. And which meant that India, as one of the largest source of this talent, a lot of the demand for this kind of talent came to India. And I think thirdly, if we look at what happened in 2021 in terms of the investment that came in, when we started 2021, there were about 4 or 5 unicorns. By the time we exited, we were almost at about 64 to 65 unicorns. And all of these, whether be it the unicorns, whether be it about scaling up digital capabilities, or whether be about convergence that we saw with engineering organizations, BFSI sector, all going for their own digital transformation journeys, all of this created a huge demand-supply gap. So along with the fact that the market really opened up in 2021, with organizations struggling to meet supply side, and if you look at the commentary that came from any of the large MNC IT services in India, all of them spoke about supply side challenges, and which is where, because of the demand that was there in the system, the number of opportunities, I think candidates or prospective employees really ruled the market, and which is where organizations also struggled to retain these employees, and we ended up with historical high attrition numbers.
The question now is that, and I want to talk a bit about the startup space, because the startup space is being projected and the image is that those are the big employers, right? The largest number of new white-collar, high-skilled jobs are being created there. Sekhar, are you seeing this in the data? Are you seeing this in the number of postings, for example? Are these the guys who are creating a significant number of jobs, again, in absolute numbers?
Absolutely. In fact, if you look at the sector which has seen the sharpest rise in terms of job postings, it's been BFSI, primarily driven by fintech. And we know this has been the hottest sector in terms of attracting investments and while we see the investment announcements, we know behind every investment announcement, there'll be a huge hiring plan. So we've seen almost about 37% hike in terms of jobs available in the fintech space. And that's significant. We also seen significant numbers growing in terms of logistics space. We're seeing significant numbers in terms of, IT and telecom, and so absolutely right what you said in terms of these sectors where digital native skills are important, where a lot of investment is being attracted. That's absolutely reflecting like to like in terms of the hiring patterns.
Yeah. Just your take on that as well, Mr. Singh. Are startups creating more noise, or are they actually, hiring people in large enough numbers? Because we hear about all of these billions of dollars being invested in startups. At the end of the day, in a country like India, which has a large number of low-skilled workforce available, does it make more sense from a broad economic point of view to have more factories where people can go get stable jobs, or fewer startups which will have perhaps lesser number of very high-skilled jobs?
So I think one has to understand the model that startups work with. They work on a very high talent density model, which essentially means that for every individual they hire, the output that they expect is much more. And I think there is truth to it that there have been so many startups that have coming up. So I am based out of Bangalore, and any coffee shop that you enter, you always have a startup discussion going on about a new idea. So I think the sheer volume of these number of startups that have come up, and Sekhar was talking about fintech, I think edtech has been the same. There has been a mushrooming industry of B2B SaaS companies flourishing as well. And the entire confidence that has come from the few IPOs that have happened in 2021 or the buybacks, I think there is a lot of confidence, which has meant that in terms of sheer number of startups that have come up, it means that they are now a significant employer in the country. Having said that, can they compete with the IT services majors? I think IT services majors, for the number of people that they hire as a single unit and overall as a sector, I think there's a fair amount of way to go for startups to be there. And I don't really think they want to be there as well. I think their model is different. So I think when we look at India, depending on the journey, depending on the business that you are in, I think there is space for both. There is absolutely space for our traditional tech services companies to flourish. And the numbers that have come out in the last quarter and even the last week, they give confidence to investors over the long term. And at the same time, I think the number of successful IPOs that we are seeing, it means that both from an innovation and startup sector as well, it's flourishing. So I believe both have a place in the country. Depends, more risky employees perspective. Perhaps would want to try out their luck in startups and feel more comfortable in that environment. And people looking for more stable jobs probably are looking at other sectors.
In fact, I would like to make a point here around startups. It's not necessary that all startup jobs are high-tech jobs. There's a lot of investment that has gone into logistics companies, which have turned unicorns, into edtech companies, into fintech companies, into e-com companies, and all of these investments not just result in high-end tech jobs, but also result in a lot of operational jobs. Whether you take delivery boys, drivers, inside sales executives, for every Bharat Pay that's there, they would go out and need, literally hundreds of people or thousands of people to do merchant acquisition on the ground. So it's a myth that startups only create high-tech jobs. They're actually creating a lot of jobs downstream as well. So I think we should all hope and wish that every sector grows, including startups. It's good for the country.
No. I'm not saying there should be an either or, but I'm talking about the theme that I started with. While it's great that you now have a situation where, software engineers are in great demand. A lot of your new models of business have created the space for gig workers who have the opportunity to log in and log off as they want. The fact is that overall the numbers are looking like we need to do much more. So as someone who's tracked this space for so long, Sekhar, let me come to you. On what do you think we can do to reduce this gap? Both of you have started this discussion talking about the two halves of India. They need to meet somewhere, because now you need to have enough people with a disposable income to consume all of these services that startups are pushing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Tanu, you're absolutely right that we need to do more in terms of formalization of the other half of the Indian employment space. And I think that's also happening, and that's also being rapidly accelerated by technology-driven startups again in this space. And we know that there are a bunch of startups which are working in the formalization of blue collar workers or gray collar workers, as we call it, and that's the only way, because that will help employers hire people at scale, employers manage people at scale. When they're able to manage people and hire people at scale using technology, they will go towards formalizing some of these employee classes versus relying on informal space. So a bunch of those things happen, and in the budget we saw some good announcements around production linked incentive, which hopefully should drive up the opportunities created in the manufacturing space. I think there are quite a few drivers that are working simultaneously. I think we should give it time. Technology is going to be an accelerator or a force multiplier in some form or shape, and that's already happening as we see it. And we being part of Quess Group as a whole, we also see the other half of India, where we are India's one of India's largest employer, and we see that space is also growing very, very fast in terms of the last mile or the entry level workforce. I think there's a bunch of things working in parallel, and I'm very, very optimistic about the next 12 months that we see this data kind of turning around into the green space. But at the same time, we need to do a bit more in terms of kind of understanding and kind of embracing the change that is happening around us. So gig, you mentioned about gig. Several organizations are now fundamentally okay with working in a gig kind of a model. We should give more flexibility to people so that you don't expect somebody to travel thousands of kilometers away to find a job which pays them 25,000. So there's a bunch of those things that we need to structurally do, make good quality jobs available for people where they are, use technology to help them discover the best possible job that they can, so that they feel like there is a career path available to them, and therefore they invest in the early stages of their career. The government incentives around capital investments, around production linked incentives will kick in. So all in all, I think we're doing a bunch of good things. I do expect this space across both the halves to turn into green very soon.
Yeah, your comment on that, Mr. Singh, how can we get both the halves to grow at least at the most decent kind of space? We're still a consumer-led economy. We need to have more disposable incomes and better paying jobs for a wider number of people.
Yeah, no, I think I echo a lot of what Sekhar said in terms of technology being a great lever. I believe, where infrastructure cannot reach, technology can. And today, if you look at the penetration in terms of the entire 4G, 5G, rather 4G networks that is there, and in fact, for example, incidentally, internet is probably cheaper in India than in Europe, and which is a great access for a lot of individuals who are not based out of tier 1, tier 2 cities. So I think technology is a great leveler, and there's a lot of innovation that's happening in providing vocational training, skill-based training, and so on and so forth. I think for many, as our verticals, be it the technology sector vertical grow, or be it the manufacturing and the engineering verticals grow, there is an insatiable demand for talent. The only thing that has been holding us back right now, it's almost like connecting a buyer to a seller, buyer in this case being these sectors, and sellers being dispersed out of India. And I think technology will help us bridge that gap, one. Second, we've also started seeing more and more decongestion of the metros. I think we've seen a lot of firms now started looking at tier 2, tier 3 cities in terms of increasing their spread. They started doing this by moving more voice or inside sales and those kinds of jobs to tier 2, tier 3, where cost of operations are lower, and more with remote working coming in, we're also seeing that jobs higher up the value chain move to those cities. I think, and as more and more of this happen, as there is penetration deeper inside the country, I think we'll see both the halves coming together, both in terms of opportunities available for people and also the exposure to the way the modern job place works. Having said that, the third thing that we've also seen a lot of organizations do is that they've realized that today a lot of the educational institutes in India still are probably set in ways that are embedded in old ways of learning, and they've gone back to tie-ups with universities. They themselves have launched some technology-based or edtech platforms where people, just after completing their 10+2, etc., can make use of these facilities to gain very, very specific skills that make them very readily employable to the sector, and which is where I think somewhere the answer lies. I hope, like what Sekhar said, we can do this in 12 to 24 months, but in my sense, might be a slightly longer journey, if I'm honest.
We have a very detailed skill development program, government-backed, which has been in the works and has been happening for some time now. It's important to rev that up and improve the skills overall so that this gap is closed between the two halves of India, as it's been referred to. Thank you so much today, Mr. Singh, Mr. Garisa, for joining us on the show.